Welcome everybody to what we're calling track 8 of the Giants Jukebox. The playlist this year is on shuffle mode, so while this is the first track we're playing this school year, it's actually the last course in our K-8 sequence. Glad you guys are here. We had 6 people registered and we've got 4 in the room so far, so that is awesome. And if you are in the room right now viewing this live, we will be sending you sketch information at the end of the sequence in March. So don't freak out if things don't appear in MOEX tomorrow. When we've done all of these this year, I'll send an email out to everyone reminding them to be on the lookout for an email from the state of Michigan. If you're getting this video after we've recorded it, we're glad you're viewing this recap and hope it's helpful, but we're sorry you can't get the state clock hours. The goal of these sessions is to give you a bird's eye view of an entire Giants grade level. And while we will get into the weeds on some of the activities overall, we're going to try our best to give you a good look at the entire grade level as it stands. So tonight you are stuck with me solo. Dr. Gershmel will normally be here in a lot of these, and I was one of the 8th grade unit authors alongside of him. He is traveling right now, but this one is Dave heavy anyway. It's why we laid this track down first. So you're stuck with me solo, but I am a former 8th grade teacher who was one of the lead writers for Giants 8th grade, so I think you're in mostly good hands. Really quickly before we get in, I am the most laid back online learning presenter you will ever have. You can have your cameras on, you can have your cameras off. Does not matter to me. I know you guys are all doing this on your free time, so feel free to multitask if you need to. I have seen it all. I've had people with their cameras off cooking dinner while I'm going through this before. So if that's you, I might just say, hey, turn the camera off because I'm super hungry. But otherwise, this is your PL, so do what you need to do. Take care of your needs when you need to take care of them. There's not an official designated break tonight, so because it's only a 2-hour session. So if you need one, go ahead and jump out and take one when you need it. As far as the agenda for the evening goes, here's a general overview of what you're going to be in for tonight. With 2 hours and 4 basic topics here, you might be kind of thinking you might spend about half an hour in each portion, and you're sort of right, but some of it might take more than the rest of it. Into the weeds might take a little bit longer. The assessment portion isn't a huge conversation. It's more about how to access it, etc. And there will be some time for Q&A with me on specific content at the end as well. And I also, just as a way of a quick update on the Giants project, wanted to let you know that you will continue to access it off of misocialstudies.org, but I'm excited to announce that Giants is now officially a Michigan Council for the Social Studies project and product. Going forward, MCSS is going to be supporting the curriculum, and as a former president, current secretary, incoming treasurer, I've done it all. I couldn't be more excited to bring us home to the place that makes the most sense. So, going forward, we're also going to be partnering with a couple of funding sources to potentially do some research on how well Giants prepares students for success. So if you're interested in possibly participating in this later when we've got more info, please let me know. We're not off the ground running with that yet, but the funding is going to be coming in and we're excited to undertake the research. So before I get into the weeds of tonight, any questions so far just over what you're in for tonight or over the agenda or anything like that? Dana was in a couple of PDs with me on Monday when I was up in Alpena, and I talked about the 3 deep breaths that I take on a Zoom call. So if I ask for questions, I will take 3 deep breaths, and if no one's unmuted by the end, I will move on. So Giants, if you're not familiar with what it is, or if you're just coming into it this year, in 2015, Michigan launched the Michigan Open Book Project, and it was a free online textbook. It still is, it's still available. Free online textbook that is, it is what it is. It's simply a reader of sorts for kids and kind of a launch pad. And one of the questions we kept getting over and over again was, hey, where's the creative materials that goes along with the curriculum? And, being a textbook project, it wasn't technically curriculum, but Ottawa ISD is where Giants started, and they created that wraparound package. So it started with just sixth grade, and then it expanded into seventh and eighth, and then we went down into the elementary grades, and all the grade levels have gone through several revisions since then. Sixth grade is the most robust, but eighth grade has had quite a bit of work done to it over the years as well, including this year where I've gone through and tried to identify any broken links. So, um, that's kind of the backstory behind this. The Giants project has been running since 2017, and all the people in the picture you see here have all contributed to it in some way, shape, or form, plus a few others that we didn't get. All right, if you have never been to Giants before, there's a variety of ways to access the units in the past. Some of these are still alive and active, but you want to make sure that any place you're accessing the materials from has this little laptop logo in the upper left-hand corner, because that means you are pulling it from misocialstudies.org, and that is the place where we are currently hosting things. Some people may also be reaching it from kind of a brown tinted window that is coming out of Ottawa ISD. I don't know how much longer that's going to be up. It was supposed to be taken down about 2 years ago, and it's still up there, but we no longer support the project there because the consultant that ran it has retired and moved on. So it kind of got ported over to misocialstudies.org. So always make sure, and you can bookmark the Google Docs if you would like to, but always make sure that you are looking for this logo somewhere on the page, because that means you're accessing it from the right place. You're getting it from misocialstudies.org. And Google is always fun. It's always changing things. I will point anyone who has used a Google form since March of 2025 as a great reminder of how easy it used to be to share a link, and now all the extra steps you have to do now. So I recently got an email from a teacher wondering why we changed permissions of the lessons. We did not. Google changed some of that functionality. It's annoying, and it occasionally means we have to rebuild a lesson plan document. So that's why launching it directly from this website and this view is your safest means. But the Google Docs, we do a little bit less too over time. We just make little updates. So those should be safe, but with the caveat of if you're running into issues, launch it from this website. So getting into the weeds now. I taught eighth grade for a really long time. It's my favorite class. It's probably because it was the one that I prepared for in college. It was the first thing I was hired in to teach. I got the incredible chance to work on all the US history standards during the standards update process. So I got to watch the standards in some cases get even better than they were before. And overall, eighth grade is a really interesting part of US history to cover with your students. As I kind of re-prepared and went through all the units again tonight, not tonight, but to prepare for tonight, I thought about what the idea of a compelling question for the entire school year for eighth grade might be. So a compelling question, as defined by the C3 framework and by our standards, is one that is big, broad, arguable, intellectually meaty, and above all, very student-friendly. So the student-friendly piece is exceptionally important, because when you bog a question down with too much teacher lingo, you forget your target audience. So your supporting questions are your opportunity to put the kid to sleep, but the compelling question should be one that sparks a little more interest to students. So I'll show you a great example of this in a minute, but so many of the problems we're still grappling with today stem back to compromises we made at the founding. So in thinking about what might an unofficial eighth grade US history curriculum compelling question be, I thought, does compromise solve or create problems might be an interesting one to explore. So this is kind of a bonus from eighth grade US history from this particular rollout. But it is, it is definitely worth exploring with your kids that, compromise is sometimes good, but creates a lot of problems. And the story of eighth grade really starts with the Constitutional Convention and some of the compromises that we made there. This is our pacing view. This used to be clickable, and on some browsers it still is, but the purpose of this page is to show you roughly how long everything should take in a perfect world when you're comfortable with the content and the curriculum. You can see we've got a couple of shorter units here. In particular, units 0, 1, 4, and 5 are a little bit shorter than the rest. Unit 6 is the Civil War, and that's probably the longest of all the units together. Remember, too, that this is in a perfect world with no snow days, no interruptions for assemblies or fire drills or any of the weird things that sometimes happen. It takes about 3 to 5 years to get good with any curriculum. So if you are not, I had an eighth grade teacher from my West Shore area ask me some questions the other day and told me where they were and said, "Hey, no judgment, please." And I said, absolutely no judgment, because it takes multiple years to get really good at this, and they're teaching in a unique situation anyway. So 3 to 5 years to get good with any curriculum project. And also keep in mind too, I know some of you have taught eighth grade for a really long time, so it's old hat. So this can be a framework that you build from. And you can steal and take and mine anything that you want from the Giants units. You don't have to follow it verbatim. We tend to see the people that follow it verbatim are the ones that have switched from another grade level, and that's to gain some of that comfort. So however you use the units is completely fine and up to you. But we do have enough in here for a full year. So let's sort of launch into what that year looks like. Unit 2 is our sort of fifth grade review unit. And our pacing view, we say no longer than 2 weeks. And that is sometimes very controversial because I know a lot of eighth grade teachers. I was guilty of it too, guys. I will totally fess up. I spent a good chunk of my first marking period of eighth grade reteaching all of fifth grade. Um, it wasn't until I made it like 3 years into teaching where I went, gosh, I'm not getting through everything by the end of the year. I wonder why. And then, re-examining my standards as a fourth year teacher, I went, oh, you know what? I'm really not supposed to reteach all of fifth grade. I understand the argument behind it. I understand why people feel the need to do it. And if you need to adjust a little bit longer than 2 weeks, that is completely your MO, and that's completely up to you. But we have a whole year's worth of content that we've got to get through in eighth grade. And I find a lot of eighth grade teachers have a hard time making it through Reconstruction. So our recommendation is no longer than 2 weeks on this unit, stretching it up or down just a little bit as necessary, but don't spend 9 weeks reteaching all of fifth grade. There's just not enough time in the school year to do that. So our unit 0, our review unit, we say about 2 weeks, and the compelling question is, when is revolution justified? So we then take a look at the compelling question, the supporting questions, I should say. What influenced colonists' decisions to declare independence? So this is where we start to look at that road to revolution from fifth grade, and why did we do this? Why did this American experiment begin with? The second question that we take a look at, and this is the focus of the second unit, what were the colonists' reasons for separating from Great Britain? And then finally, what were some examples of conflict and cooperation that resulted from the American Revolution? So again, we're not looking at a huge amount of time on this, but we are looking at about 2 weeks. And some of the activities that you might go through with this, I'm going to pull open a couple of these lessons right now to kind of show you here. Let's go back to Unit 0, Lesson 1. Going through this, drag it over to the screen I am actually sharing. There we go. So your lesson sequence is always going to tell you what direct content expectations are being hit by just this lesson. There's a unit overview that I'm not going to share a lot of with you tonight, but all of your content standards are hit throughout the course of the year. We also offer up some learning targets, but we transition away from that around Unit 3, and I'll talk about what we transition to and why we did that when we get to that particular point. C3 indicators are skill-based pieces that come out of the C3 framework. The C3 framework is kind of the how to teach alongside the what to teach of your content expectations. So we pick some of the ones that we use the most in terms of some of the activities that we do in each unit, and those will always appear up here. We have a lot of folks because you can use your own textbook or you can use the Michigan Open Book Project. It does not matter. Textbooks are textbooks. They cover the same content. They just do it in different ways. And it was always fascinating to me after the Open Book Project launched, the number of people who said, I don't quite understand how to use this book. So we created a overview video for teachers here that we refer back to in other grade levels as well, that sort of walks you through how you might choose to teach with an online textbook like the Open Book Project. So that video is available here, and everything in the Giants units is clickable. So you can just hover your mouse over it, click, and it will take you out to the thing. In this particular case, it's a YouTube video. And it's about 10 minutes in length, and it'll walk you through the various ways you can use the Open Book Project here. I'm going to come back to the where do we put our colony presentation, because that is one of the things I'm highlighting in the second half of this. But again, all of these things are just clickable, and you click and go. And we are in the process of starting to identify about how long we think each step of the process should take. So we've been working with some 8th grade teachers that have been using the curriculum. And, I know how long this may have taken me in my classroom, depending on the year. But some of the teachers who have been piloting this for us over the last few years are slowly trickling some of that information in. So start to look in this column for about how many days we think things should take. A good rule of thumb is to go back to that pacing view, and I will do that right now here with this window. And however long the unit is, so unit 0 is 2 weeks. If there's 3 lessons, divide that 10 days by 3, and you're at roughly 3 days per lesson. It's easier with a 6-week unit because if you divide it by 3, it's about 2 weeks per lesson. But that's the general rule of thumb we tell people to count on, unless we explain otherwise. But we're starting to get some of those numbers in here as well. So, let's see. Moving into Unit 1. So Unit 1 is the Constitution unit. And Unit 1 is the unit where we will, kind of review that other part of 5th grade. This is very much linked to our foundation standards at the beginning of 8th grade. And we do this unit here, this Constitution unit here, for a very good reason. We go through the entire Constitution, which I feel like more kids need to read and understand and grapple. I feel like there's some adults that could use some refreshers on the Constitution as well. But we need to take kids through the Constitution and through the Bill of Rights. And we take them here all the way through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Now, you are more than welcome to go through the remaining 12 as well, if you would like. But we specifically cover the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments here because it makes sense in the Constitution to take a look at those amendments. And there is always an M-STEP question on some of the Reconstruction amendments. So recognizing that a lot of people are just starting the Civil War by the time they hit April when the M-STEP season begins, we wanted to at least front load some of the information. And then you can go back and review it quickly when we get to that point in the year. So our Constitution unit will take us all the way through the 15th Amendment. But again, we don't want you spending a long time on this one. This one's about 3 or 4 weeks total. And we don't want you to reteach all of 5th grade. We're highlighting the stuff that we think you will find the most useful to cover the story of Middle American history here. And when you take a look at our supporting questions for this unit, Phil and I are very good friends. He is an incredible human being. He's been a mentor of mine for a long time. But Phil and I fought incessantly during both rounds of writing and updating the 8th grade U.S. history curriculum because, and it's not because of our first supporting question, why did the Articles of Confederation fail? It's because of the 3 that follow. What key issues emerged at the Constitutional Convention, what key issues were resolved at the Constitutional Convention, and what key issues remain unresolved at the Constitutional Convention. Inquiry is really messy, and what Phil wanted to see was one lesson where we only talked about issues that emerged, and one lesson that we only talked about which ones were resolved and which ones remained unresolved. But in putting it together like that, we realized we lost part of the story. So we allude to the fact that this is going to be unresolved, and then we cover it a little bit more in the next lesson. We allude to the fact that this one was resolved, and then we cover it a little more in the next lesson. So because inquiry is messy, that's why Phil and I fought over these supporting questions and the structure of these units. That said, that's how it made most sense to me because that's how I taught it. And if that does not make as much sense to you, go ahead and restructure the units however you want. Remember, we've given you everything you need to cover this stuff. Um, so do it in whatever order you feel best fits. But and keeping in mind that inquiry is messy and thinking about that eighth grade wide compelling question of is compromise, is compromise always good or bad? I did not say that one well, but in thinking about that overall compelling question for the whole year, um, the structure, the way that we put this stuff together really does showcase how messy the Constitutional Convention was. And we feel like that was important for students. So there you have it. That's our first unit. Then unit 2 is the very first unit of the actual eighth grade content. And the original compelling question, so if you have bookmarked this before, the original compelling question was something along the lines of were the first presidents more reactive or proactive in following domestic and foreign policy advice from George Washington's farewell address? And in thinking about our target demographic, 13 and 14-year-olds in particular, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, depending on that age range, that wasn't a really compelling question for them. So what we did was we revised it this year to be, was Washington right? Um, this revision was long in coming, and it actually does a fantastic job of catching kids' attention because middle schoolers are always concerned with what's wrong or right, even when what's right is wrong and what's wrong is right. With middle schoolers, that was always the gray area I loved with my eighth grade friends. We are going to open this with Washington's farewell address, which is another bold choice. So we're skipping the Washington presidency and then moving back to the Washington presidency, but we do that very intentionally, and we'll talk about why in just a minute. But feel free again to resegment it if you want, but this was an intentional choice on our part to open with Washington's farewell address and then look at presidents after him up to around Jackson, and then finish with Washington's presidency as well, so that we can really trace some of the themes that he talks about in his farewell address through his presidency after we've had a chance to look at the first 50 years of or 40, 50 years of the American experiment. So the supporting questions for Unit 2 are, was Washington's advice to the new nation, or what was Washington's advice to the new nation as he prepared to leave office? How did factions evolve into political parties? So we trace that through the lens of the next several presidents that come after him. What were some of the first foreign challenges faced by the new nation? So we trace that through the next 4 or 5 presidents to come after him. And then how did domestic issues of the day expand or reduce the power of the Constitution? So here's where we then backtrack, give the Washington backstory, and then talk more about, again, the 4 or 5 that came after him. We did this intentionally. Like I said, if you don't like that flow, again, you can move it around however you need to, but Unit 2 is the last of what I would call the traditional units. And then Unit 3 is where things shift and change a little bit and follow a more focused format going forward. Our Unit 3 still has a little bit of backtrack. However, we introduce some new elements here that I'm going to share in a little more depth in a minute. We start providing a student journal for each unit. We have overview presentations for each unit, and we have some compelling and supporting question posters for each unit here as well, and this is where it begins. So our supporting questions for Unit 3, what kinds of growth does a new nation experience? In this one, we're starting to get into the expansion. We're starting to get into a little bit more on westward expansion. We get into the Jackson presidency with the third compelling question here. And we start really hammering home this idea of slavery and the role that it plays in the expansion of the nation in the second lesson. So this is where, after we've spent some time reviewing and that reviewing fifth grade, and then we have our Constitution unit, and then we talk about the first presidents, this is where we start to go, hey, remember back at the Constitutional Convention, some of those things that were unresolved? Slavery was one of those issues that was not completely resolved there. And this is a can kick that we continue to do throughout the whole course. We kick the can of slavery down the road with all these different things that happen, leading up to the Civil War. So that is our strong Unit 3. Unit 4 gets into the Reform era. This was my favorite unit to teach every year that I had 8th grade U.S. history on my schedule. The Reform era, it's very direct for most teachers. The content expectations are also very direct for most teachers. There's not a lot of guesswork in here. And we frame this one around the question, can a few people really change society? Can a few people change society? And I think that this is a great reminder for students that if there's an injustice in school that they don't like, they can change society. If there is, something larger scale than that, if it's a local issue, if it's a state issue, if it's a national issue, people can push for change. And I think that's one of the most wonderful things. Colleen is on this call, and every year I get to be a We the People judge in her classroom. And I know she does it that last week because they're not ready for it the first week of school. But every time I go in, every time I've either Zoomed in or gone in to see these kids, the fact that she has imparted onto all of these kids that they can make a difference in the world, that they can go out, they are equipped with the tools. And it's amazing to see. And if I ever don't get an invitation, Colleen, just know I'm going to be driving down, just going to be driving and circling around your school like a crazy person, in the hopes that I can catch a glimpse of, oh, it's today, I'm coming in. So it's incredible to see. And this Reform era unit is a great way to continue to broach that with your students in a non-We the People format. So this lets them know, again, religion played a part in a lot of the reforms. So we get to talk a little bit about that. So how did religious and democratic ideals influence antebellum reform movements? And how are these reform movements connected? We talk about that in the first lesson in the Reform era. In what ways did the various reform movements reflect political, economic, and social concerns? We talk about that in the second lesson. And then we focus solely in on the abolitionist movement. So how did the abolitionist movement contribute to growing sectionalism in the United States? And that's a great segue and transition into the 5th unit of 8th grade. At what point is compromise no longer an option? So in this particular case, we jump back again to that Constitutional Convention and we review again some of those things that were left unresolved and why they were left unresolved. And now they're going to start to come to a head. Then we take a look at some of the geographic, social, political, economic, and cultural issues that have taken place throughout history. We review some and we introduce some new ones. And we talk about how all of these things continue to increase sectional tension between the North and the South during this time. And then we move into, it's kind of a random content expectation that I would have liked to have seen kind of embedded in other expectations around the entire course. But we have one in this vein that is specifically about differences that existed in the lives of free Blacks, free whites, and enslaved peoples. So we have a lesson on that one, again, to honor the content expectations. So you can do that one in any order. You can do that last lesson first if you want. You can do it in the middle. You can do it earlier in the units. It's all pretty self-contained on this one. But that leads us into, then, can you win a civil war? I'm going to talk a little bit more about one of the ways that we open this unit in just a minute, as soon as I'm done with the bird's eye overview here. But we do have kids actually read some of the state secession documents. And keep in mind that these are going to be really hard for kids right now, as well as kids through the current 5th grade class. The current 5th and 6th graders were the ones who lost the most instruction during the COVID years. So the current sixth grade class were kindergartners. The current fifth grade class were preschoolers. The year that we officially shut down, and then that next year we were up and down quite a bit. So they lost a lot of instruction, and so the documents aren't easy for any student. But coming up, you're going to have a bubble group in particular that these are going to be really hard for. So we've embedded some literacy strategies in eighth grade that will hopefully help you with that as well. So our supporting questions for Unit 6 on the Civil War: what are the geographic, political, economic, and cultural reasons why the South seceded? It's not any one answer. So let's explore that with kids. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the North and South at the beginning of the Civil War? So each had their area of like, hey, we're good at this. Each had an area where maybe not so strong. So we really want to explore those with kids. Then we have a really long final lesson that talks about how the war impacted the lives of all Americans. So we really get into the weeds of the Civil War, but one thing you will not see, and we give you a crash course video for you to watch, not necessarily to share with your students in this unit as well, that talks about why we don't go a battle by battle by battle approach. If you pull open 10 textbooks, at least 7 of them will be like, and then this battle happened, and then this battle happened, and then this battle happened, and then this battle happened. We don't do that. We talk about the war overall, and we do showcase some of the big ones that you would expect to see. But if you are expecting to see a blow by blow of every major battle of the Civil War in the Giants units, you're not going to find it there, and you also won't find it in MC3. We take a look at the war in its total, and if there are other ones that you want to fill in the gaps on, you're more than welcome to. But you will see the big ones. You will see the heavy hitters. So. And then finally, our Reconstruction unit: can a nation reunite and rebuild after nearly destroying itself? So that's our Unit 7 compelling question. It's for Reconstruction. And this one is a 4-unit lesson. So take that 6 weeks and kind of divide it by 4, and you're looking at, about a week and a half per lesson, roughly. The supporting questions: what were the competing political views on Reconstruction? What were the goals of Reconstruction? How did new legislation and constitutional amendments impact Reconstruction? And then why did Reconstruction end when it had not achieved its goals? So these are the things that each of those lessons will be centered around. Starting with Unit 3, and I will pull these open. These are now where I'm going to start to get into some of those weeds a little bit more. Starting around Unit 3 is when we started creating compelling and supporting question posters. So we transitioned from the I can statements into these, and we did that for a variety of reasons. The biggest one being that we prefer, and by we I mean the social studies community around the state, when we look at I can statements that a lot of teachers have developed, they're not always as robust as we would like to see them be. And what we have sort of decided is, you know what? Instead of an I can statement, I would love to have the compelling question that a unit is centered around up on the board through an entire unit. And then I want to kind of change and show kids the supporting questions as we go through each lesson as well. So a lot of kids, this is where 8th grade is where we started doing this around Unit 3 so that they can still have the I can statements for the first couple of units. We also changed authors around this time. So Unit 2 and 3 is really where Phil and I came in to replace the original authors of the units. And it felt like a good transition moment to move from there. So these are printable. We recommend that you keep your compelling question poster up for the whole unit. And then underneath it, switch out, depending on your what lesson you're in, switch out the supporting question posters as we go through. These have gone through some revisions over the years. We had some teachers who said, you know what, my principal really wants to know that they're connected to standards. So we put the coding for the standards down here as well. You can choose to share those with students if you would like. We've tried to choose some appropriate images to go along with some of these as well to help emphasize the point. But these should print off nicely on legal paper if you have that in your school. They will shrink down to regular size paper as well. Feel free to print these out each unit and put them up for students to view going through in lieu of your icon statements. You can still use your icon statements as well. We just wanted to give you the resources to do this. And then the other thing that starts to pop up in Unit 3 is we start to do a unit overview presentation. So this is an opportunity to preface the learning with students and say, here are some of the things that we're going to go through over the course of this unit. That's not up. Oh, there it is. Okay. And again, it's using some of the same graphics as our posters. So we're hoping that that will help reinforce that as well. And we put some stuff in the presenter's notes for you guys to kind of tell you why, why we're doing these things. Again, we've been updating these and adding to them over time based off of some feedback we received from teachers. But again, view this presentation. You can share the presentation with students if you would like via your Google Classroom. Totally okay with that. And it does go along nicely with everything else in terms of the posters and the student journals, etc. And then the student journal, I should have pulled all of these things up beforehand. I'm kind of doing them. I've got multiple windows up at once, but the student journals are there for you to kind of organize your students' thinking. The student journal itself, here's one for Unit 4, has its own little table of contents for students to click on. So again, I would share this with the students via Google Classroom or Schoology or whatever it is that I am using, but all the boxes are clickable for them to type their notes in as they go through. And then this becomes a really great study guide for the assessments, which I will share at the end of the day or at the end of the session tonight. And then finally, the last thing before I ask for the first round of questions and then get into the weeds with some of the really cool spatial thinking activities, the succession documents. I'm not sure why it's as controversial a statement as it's become over the years, but there's been an idea that's been floated by some that the Civil War wasn't about slavery at all, but states' rights. It's one of those arguments that makes its way into casual conversation over time, and it makes it in so frequently that people just start to believe it without taking a few steps back to sort of look at that claim overall and analyze it. To say it was solely about slavery is also a bit of a misnomer, but to suggest slavery wasn't one of the major root causes is disingenuous, especially when you take a step back and ask the question, states' rights to do what exactly? So in the 8th grade Giants course, we take the time to analyze this question in slightly greater detail by having students read the secession documents from many of the southern states. 4 of the 11 Confederate states, it's South Carolina, Mississippi, Texas, and Georgia, I believe, explicitly mention slavery as the reason for seceding from the Union. And while 4 out of 11 is just under 50%, it is very much implied heavily in the remaining secession documents. Giants is not intended to change everyone's mind about things, but it does once again try to get everyone who may come across these lessons in units to think a little bit harder about how multiple things can be true at once. And even if you're pressed for time or have a really low group, we really encourage you to spend some time on these documents with your kiddos because very few things in life are as cut and dry as we would like to believe that they are. And this is a great opportunity to point out one of those things in particular and discuss it in class. So with that, I am about to transition into some spatial thinking activities. These are representative of what you'll find all over the 8th grade Giants units. There are 4 in particular that I would like to go through, but in the interest of time, we may not have time to go through all of them. But before I do, that was your bird's eye overview of all 8 Giants units for 8th grade. And I'm wondering if anyone has any questions right now about the structure, about what I just went through, that I can help answer for you now, or we can wait till the end with the Q&A. Three deep breaths and a swig of my Waterloo Blackberry Lemonade this evening. So, hearing none, we will move on. Every grade level, and Melissa, you're going to be stuck with me at the end of the month in the afternoon, and I'm going to showcase some of these as well. But every grade level has an activity on where do we put R, and this is a spatial thinking activity that comes from Phil. Anytime you see something that is usually in the Comic Sans font, that is coming from Dr. Phil Gershmel. And I like to throw the doctor in there with the same with the in the same line that I say Comic Sans because that's not something most people think about. Like, gosh, someone from academia is using Comic Sans as their font. There's actually a really good reason. Dr. Gershmel has done a ton of research in brain science, and Comic Sans is actually a very readable font for dyslexic students. I keep trying to move him over to Open Dyslexic as another one, but this one is more readable for everyone. So he has used, so anytime you come across something that's in Comic Sans, this is a Dr. Gershmel activity. The other thing to notice about a Dr. Gershmel activity is if you open any of his PowerPoints in any of the grade levels, they're long, sometimes 60, 70, 80 slides or more. They can take multiple class periods, but you can also do them in 20 minutes because they are all set up to be they're all set up to guide you as the teacher, whether you're comfortable with the content and the material or not successfully through it. But they're also great conversation pieces for the students. So this choosing a location for a fort activity is actually, if I scan through my presenter view notes here, looks like it is about 82 slides in length. But I'm going to go through it in about 15 minutes, and you can go through it at about this same speed with your students as well. So just know when you open them up, if you go, oh my God, how many days is this going to take? Usually around 2, but you can also do them a lot faster, as you'll see tonight. These are also great. I used to make it a game when I would go out and present. I would pick a Dr. Gershmel PowerPoint I hadn't done yet, and I would do it cold that night because I also wanted to demonstrate for you that his in particular, are set up very, very well for whether you are super, super comfortable in the content or not. Unfortunately, at this point, I've delivered all of his PowerPoints once or twice, so I have experience with all of them, and the choosing a location ones are some of my favorites. So the major question behind this activity, which actually appears in 8th grade in Unit 0, it's one of the first ones that we do. It's usually one of the first activities we do in every grade level, but in this particular one, you can also resurface it a little bit later on. So this one is choosing a location for your fort. And it's asking students to consider what they might need to think about in terms of connections and conditions in a place when you locate a fort. All of our history classes are history and geography blended together. And so we really strongly bring out the geography with all the Phil activities. So we always let you know that in any grade level, and 8th grade is no exception, the place that you are about to investigate is a real place, and we are going to look at it through that historical lens. We are going to keep where this place actually is a secret for now, because we want to focus on a little bit more important question. How did people decide where to locate their insert name of thing here? In this case, it's a fort in any particular moment in time. Teachers make decisions all day, every day. We all make decisions all day, every day, but teachers probably more so than anyone else. But thinking about that decision-making process is not always something that we all stop and do ourselves. So this is a great opportunity for teachers to do the same thing. So you're looking for a place to build a city. You want it to make sure that it's fortified because there could be some enemies in the area. This is sometime after Columbus sailed to America, and every one of these PowerPoints has the same call out. You do not have a cell phone. That always blows kids' minds that you don't have a cell phone back in those days. Cell phones, we're only looking at about 20 years of history with those, and probably only about 15 of those years where they're ubiquitous and that most adults have one. So mind-blowing for adults as well as kids, but definitely kids because they've grown up around them their entire lives, whether they have one or not. So here's a map of the area in question. It's a small island, and you are, it's about half the size of Great Britain. And the person who made this map, the map maker here, followed major map making rules. Water is blue, land is green. Sometimes it shows up as shades of tan. And you don't really have a lot of information, but your scouts that you sent ahead, they have they basically come back and said, here are 5 potential places that you could build your city. And you start right off by asking kids, okay, which one are you going to vote for and why? So normally in a longer session, I would ask you guys all to drop in the chat which location you are choosing. Not going to do that this time around because again, it's an 82 slide PowerPoint, and I have several activities I wanted to showcase from here. But ask your kids to write it down. There's also an online version of this that they can play and follow along in, and make their choices digitally that I'll share with you at the end. Because as more information is added to this map, they're going to think about, okay, maybe I want to change where this goes. So after you ask them to do that, we now get into the advantages and disadvantages of voting. So if you do vote, you can't really blame anyone else if you get what you voted for. But a disadvantage is it takes time and effort to get the information you need to vote and make an informed decision. So, just asking kids, hey, where do you want to live, may not be a great idea with a map that doesn't have enough information on it. So here's that map again with the 5 choices, and you stop and you ask kids, what else would we want to know? And some typical answers that I've seen when doing this with 8th grade groups, they want to know, is there more water around? Is the water that's surrounding them drinkable, or is it not drinkable? Are there hills? Are there enemies somewhere? Like, what's it like around there? So we then get into this idea of location with students. And in Phil's world, he talks about 2 different things. He talks about conditions in a place. So, what is it like there? What are the physical characteristics of that place? And what are some examples of that? And then we also, cold. Is it cold there? Are there trees? Is it rainy? Is it hilly? Are there bears? Is it sandy? Is there iron ore? All of these are parts of the conditions in a specific place. But then we also talk about, ask kids to think about what are some other ones that maybe didn't pop up on your screen. And then we get into the connections. And connections in places are things that basically connect a place with another place. And sometimes a condition can also be a connection. A river is a great example of that. A river may bring fresh water in, and that's a condition, but it may also be used for travel, and that makes it a connection. It could be used for trade, and that makes it a connection. So, some great examples of what those might be: roads, obviously. Is it upstream from any place? Can we trade? Is there a canal? Is it far away from camp? Does a treaty exist that maybe creates some boundaries that we didn't want to go through? And again, we ask kids to think about, okay, knowing those things, what are some other connections that maybe didn't flash there? All of these at every grade level also have some version of this little quiz. So if we say fertile soil, is that a condition or a connection? Boom, fertile soil is a condition. Upstream from a swamp, is that a condition or a connection? Boom, that is a connection, because if it's upstream, there may be opportunities to travel downstream, and you could use that for trade or for transportation. Is it west of Illinois? Is that a condition or a connection? That is a connection in this particular case. Is the land flat? That would be a geographic condition. So you get to go through these. Is it close to town? Is it next to a river? And next to a river is one of those places, one of those ideas that can be both a condition and a connection, because next to a river is important condition if you need drinking water, but it is also an important connection if you're looking for avenues for travel and easy travel. So we then, after doing this with kids, bring this back to the map, and that's actually a good stopping spot for the first day if you're going to do this over multiple days, and that could probably only take you about 20, 25 minutes with your kids, and then you can revisit it later. But here's that sample map again. And, we are now going to add a few facts to this. So the very first fact that we're going to add is someone had already built a town near a river in this area. And we're going to add some cropland. So once we've added this, we ask kids, now that you know a little bit more about this place, which location would you choose? Some of the kids are going to keep their choice. Some of them are going to change it up based off of this new information. But the point is, everyone's going to vote. You're going to tally it up, and then we're going to add more information. So some other people live at place E in the big area of good cropland. Sometimes they threaten to attack you. So E here stands for enemy. Some other they do not have a navy, however. So that is, again, getting into this conditions and connections piece. That is slowing it down here to say that they may not be using that river for travel. But there are some people over here. And now you ask them, now that you know that there's an enemy nearby, would that change where you want to place your, where you would place your fort? So you give them a chance to vote again. Some of them will change their answers. It's totally fine to change their answers. A great writing activity is to ask them to justify their answer each time through. And then we're going to add some more information. So now we're going to show mountains. Now that we know that there are mountains here, would you still vote for the same place? If not, why not? What place do you prefer now? This is usually where, I have a lot of holdouts that are like, oh, I would do it here. I would do it here. This is usually where the largest group of people, when we finally overlay the mountains on each grade level, this is where the largest amount of people tend to jump ship and say, okay, no, I'm going with a different place now. We're going to add a few more rivers to the map, and we're going to ask them once again, what location would you choose now? And then because it's 8th grade, we get a little more complex. We say a new strong enemy just built a fort on the East Coast and is invading your territory. So, where would you put it now? There's always this bringing it home piece. So let's summarize, take one final vote, compare the conditions and connections at place 2 and 3. And then we say, this is a real place. Do you know where it is? This is where it actually switches and we rotate the map. I have had a lot of conversations with Phil that a lot of 8th graders don't necessarily know where the place is when it's not flipped, but they also don't know where it is when it's flipped. So we flip it here so that we can, in just a second, superimpose where it actually is here. But the flipping of it isn't as important sometimes in my mind as I think Phil thinks it is. But Phil is also the PhD with extensive knowledge of brain science, so I trust him on that. Overlaying now the actual state map, we can see it's New York. That original city is New Amsterdam, which is now called New York. And then the rest of the places, we share with you exactly who is where and what all of the other places are. All of them end up being actual places and actual cities and actual, civilizations crop up there, but not all at once. And the fort in question is actually Fort Ticonderoga. Phil loves to go out to these places. Someday when I'm retired, I'm going to do the same thing. But he loves to go out to these places and take actual pictures because then we don't have to worry about securing copyright rights. And he can get the exact shots that he wants. So this is where it then transitions over into a discussion of what it was like at Fort Ticonderoga. You can see the cannons are still positioned where they were. There's a map of the area. You can see this one is more star-shaped. It's surrounded on all sides by water or swampy ground, and it's located near the end of a long lake that could provide good travel by ship. And this is why this was a great place for this fort. The largest cannons are aimed to prevent enemy travel by ship, but cannon technology changed after the fort was built, and there is a large hill nearby, and even a small cannon of the newer style can now reach the fort from the top of the hill. So after they captured Fort Ticonderoga, the British moved on to a small town called Saratoga, but that's another story, and we tell that in a different grade level. So the final summing it up here, if students look at history as the result of decisions that people make in their environment, it engages brain power and they can remember it better. So decisions is what this whole PowerPoint presentation is about. And I went through 82 slides in about 15 minutes here. Uh, so that you can kind of get the gist. You could do this in one class period if you wanted to. I think the sweet spot is about 2 class periods with a little bit of time for debrief and conclusion, maybe on a third day. But this PowerPoint is included. And we also have, if I bring this up and I will drop this in the chat in just a sec. Every summer, Phil and I do some work together, and it's usually me bringing some of his stuff into the modern era. So we have an online game version of this that's also linked in the lesson plan. And the online game version of it is a walkthrough. So we recommend it as kind of a review for students. And if you click anywhere on the right side of the screen, it moves there. You click to the left side of the screen, it goes backwards. We've got hoverovers, but we also have the ability for students to click on their answer choice. And then the next time the map shows up, it says, last time you chose this spot. Do you still want this spot? If not, click on a new space. So this is kind of a newer update that we've added recently to the where do we put ours, and we have one for every grade level. So I'm going to drop that in the chat in case you want to play with it while we're going through some of the other things. But this is nice because it renders on a Chromebook. It renders on everything. It doesn't matter what device that you have. So any questions about the where do we put our activity? Hearing none. These are important activities to do at the outset with kids to kind of set the tone for the year with them. That said, if you skipped it, you can easily go back and do it right now with kids. You can do it anytime you want with kids. But again, we have a lot of activities like this spread throughout all the grade levels. And while I'm only showing you stuff from 8th grade tonight, they're really, really good at bringing geography to the front and center of our US history class because you can't talk about history without bringing in the geography. And Phil's activities are just incredible. So speaking of incredible Phil activities, there are 2 of these. There's one for world as well that pops up in the 7th grade class. There's a world geohistogram, but we also have a US geohistogram, and Phil was one of many developers of this project over time. And the US geohistogram is not quite as robust as the world one. Phil and I have added a couple of layers to it over time, but it does do a really interesting job of showcasing place, time, and space all together on one diagram. So um, this one, it's a graphic device, like I said, that takes advantage of the human brain's natural tendency to organize information the way that it does. This is actually, like I said, it was a Phil project with collaborators that became a National Geographic project. They still hold all the rights to this. So while Phil is bequeathing a lot of his life's work to MCSS in particular to safeguard going forward, this is not one that he can fully give us permission for because it was developed with multiple people and National Geographic holds most of the copyrights for it. But it's still included in Giants, and we are still able to give you the clickable versions that your kids can play with. And this kind of brings you through the rationale for it. So starts off, especially if you pull open the online clickable version of it, it just starts off with a title and a yellow box. And you're like, gee, Dave, this is super helpful. Thank you for that. But you can start to overlay information on it in terms of you begin with west and east. So west will be on the left-hand side of the page and east will be on the right-hand side of the page if it's facing you. And then you can overlay some years on it. So we go down on the US geohistogram to the year 1000, and we go all the way up to the year 2000. And you can see that the lines are not all steady between them. So when less things happen, we tend to, with the geohistogram, we tend to make it a little bit smaller. And when more things are happening, we make it a little bit bigger so that you can zoom in on those a little bit better. So, um, there you go. Uh, Phil has geek notes on a lot of these. The scale is logarithmic to match what research says about how the brain processes space, time, and quantity. So there is brain science behind all of this, and I understand about half of it. Phil understands all of it. When I first came across him, I understood none of it. So the fact that I'm at half now, after 12 years of working with Phil, makes me pretty happy. So, um, let's go. Keep going. So with this one, in the US geohistogram, you have blobs. The world geohistogram, we have straight lines. And if you're attending the seventh grade one next month in early November, we'll get a little bit more into the weeds of that one. But we're only showcasing the US geohistogram on this one for a very good reason. So um, this one is set up because it's such a smaller amount of time in comparison to the world geohistogram. It's set up to kind of take advantage of where populations are exploding and where the wealth was concentrated, where the political clout was concentrated. Because it always blows kids' mind on the world geohistogram when you bring up all of the worldwide empires throughout time, and then you see this tiny little fingernail version at the top of the United States because they like to think that we're as old as like ancient Egypt, and we just aren't as a country. We're one of the newer ones. So this is why this one looks a little bit different if you've seen the world geohistogram. Not going to read all of these boxes to you, but this one is meant for more teachers to explain the geohistogram. I'll show you at the end of this what it looks like for your kids to click around and play with. So um, Jamestown is one of the layers that you can turn on. So you can really see where European American history begins by overlaying Jamestown on top of the geohistogram here. Um, Again, here's the brain science behind the why. Then you can start to, so below that line, we are showing you where some of the indigenous peoples tribes were located. This is not a comprehensive list; it's not all of them, but you can see that if Jamestown is the start of European American history, we do acknowledge, of course, that the indigenous peoples were here long before the colonists arrived. Arroved. Wow, I'm going to edit that one out. Long before the colonists arrived. There we go. And, while we don't have a lot of information to overlay on the geohistogram for them, we did want to respect and acknowledge that. Then we get into where are some of these major civilizations that, not civilizations, but where are some of these major colonies that start to creep up, and what do they look like? And then you can also remove these and use it as kind of a quiz. So Santa Fe is the second one, relative. It's in the lower left-hand corner. It's about the same time as Jamestown. That's an interesting aha there for kids. And so you can use the geohistogram as a quiz tool if you need to as well. There's some major events throughout time that we like to point out on the geohistogram as well. And I'll show you what this looks like on the student-facing side in just a minute. But Northwest Ordinance is one of them. The Louisiana Purchase is another one of them. The Gold Rush is another one of them. So you see these like thin lines to start off, but as people start to rush to those areas, as that area gains wealth and people and more political clout, you can see a little bit more where these regions of the United States and how they're developing. So it's an interesting that the blue and the purple representing the northeast and the southeast of the United States at the time. It's always interesting to see that they're somewhat equal and expanding, and then all of a sudden, boom, gosh, what's happening here? The Civil War starts, and suddenly the North has more political clout than the South, and Gosh, do they ever get it back? We'll have to take a look at the geohistogram to find out. But keeping in mind that that's what some of these blobs mean can be a very interesting teaching tool for students. You don't get into the Dust Bowl in eighth grade US history, but if you did, we've got some layers there. Where did OPEC come into play? So at any time, students can add almost any kind of information to the geohistogram. You can print off a full page version that just looks like this and have them add information to it over time. Some of it is information that you'll give them based off of the geohistogram itself, and then some of it may be pieces that they found interesting as well. There's a relatively new layer on the geohistogram that I thought was an interesting one, so I ended up going through and doing the research to add it. Continue on. Cotton gin. You can see when the cotton gin was invented, or should I say, when Eli Whitney took credit for inventing the cotton gin. When it became more prolific around the South's political clout started to balloon and blossom there. Barbed wire was created out in the yellow region here about 100 years later. You've got Frederick Douglass, Henry Ford, Al Capone, so you can start to layer more information on here as well. Boom, 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 boom. Blank geohistogram, again, is a teaching tool that you can use, and kids can draw all over it throughout the course of the year. Maybe you laminate some and they can use the vis-a-vis overhead transparency markers or the whiteboard, the dry erase markers to overlay more information over time, and maybe some permanent markers for stuff you want them to remember overall. Boom, 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 going through. And these are cool because I haven't actually even shown you any of the real layers on the geohistogram yet. So in a world history class, you might still take a look at this from the lens of like who's coming to America and where are they going. So this actually is a layer that is superimposed on the geohistogram, the US geohistogram, and it's showing you who's coming in and where they're coming in from, which is kind of a neat tool as well. Certain events throughout history are also overlaid on here as a way to help potentially explain why people are moving in. The Homestead Act is a reason why a lot of people started moving further west from the Northeast in particular. My grandmother being born in the yellow zone is not something that is going to bring a lot of people over there, but it might explain some of this is actually Dr. Gershmel's grandmother, not mine. Might explain some of the colorful Russian language he will sometimes burst out with because he speaks many languages. So, all right. So the geohistogram is a great teaching tool. You can overlay some pictures on it as well, maps, etc., that all start to showcase where some of this information is coming from, why some of it might be important. And it's a teaching tool that you'll use several times throughout the course of the Giants units. We explicitly link to them. And if I sort of skip ahead here and show you exactly what this looks like from the student perspective. One sec. I couldn't actually get this up any faster if I had all of my links because I had so many things to share with you tonight. I would not have gotten this any faster. So here's what the geohistogram looks like if you were to send it to students in your learning management platform. I am always updating the version number so you can always look and see. And if it is more than a couple of years old, there might be a more up-to-date version than one that you might have bookmarked. We're trying to just overwrite all of them now with the newer versions, but we're trying to slowly port these over to MI Social Studies as well. So just always keep track of that version number. But if it has a version number, it was updated last summer, so it should be the most recent one. The region maps are here, so you can see exactly where in the United States all of those barred regions are. And if I bring those bars up, you can see where they're at. You can see exactly what labels were there. And then you can start to see some important information about US history over time. So if I go to transport names here, we've got just post roads down at the bottom, the opening of the Erie Canal around 1850, river boats after that. We've got the railroad, interstates, all of those. transportation innovations, and you can see what they're connecting as well. So you can turn these layers on and off, and you can print this for your students as well with any layers you want already layered on or off. You just take a screen capture of this and it's fully printable. So I like to showcase where are all the presidents coming from. So if I take transportation names and innovations off, very interesting. So don't really have political parties at the beginning, but coming up, we've got your Federalists, your Democratic Republicans, your Whigs, your Democrats, your Republicans. You can see, a lot of them we sort of traded back and forth with the North and the South for a while. And then, gosh, after the Civil War, there's not another Southern president up until, around here, which is kind of interesting to look at. The size of the letters on the geohistogram in this particular case also indicate length of term. So you can see some smaller R's, some smaller D's, and then you've got this big D here. And that one obviously is FDR, who served 4 terms as president. Well, was elected to 4 terms, did not serve 4 terms, elected to 4 terms. And then you can also see you've got Republicans coming from the Pacific and the Plains and the Desert Mountain Range, Democrats coming from those same areas. So where are the presidents currently coming from? We're getting fewer from the Southeast and Northeast and more from the Great Lakes, Plains, and Pacific. You can do this in waves if you would like as well. So here's the first wave, here's the second wave, here's the third wave. Suffrage is the layer that I put on. So suffrage, I layered this on because there were places that had full and partial suffrage prior to the passage of the 19th Amendment. And you'll notice that most of the places that had full suffrage, which is just the regular S, are coming out in the Pacific and the Plains region, which sort of tracks as people move further and further out there. In some cases, they want to attract people there. So suffrage was one of those ways that they did that. But suffrage, the full switch is pulled in 1919, but prior to that, certain states had partial suffrage. Doesn't look like many in the South. But in the Northeast, you had a couple that had partial suffrage, full suffrage, and then Great Lakes and Midwest, it's mostly partial. Then as you get to the Plains, Deserts, Mountains, and Pacific Range, you had full suffrage more than partial. So kind of interesting to take a look at. That was a layer that I said, hey, Phil, can I research this and put it on? And he's going to make it look prettier at some point. But that was one that I found very interesting and is another story you can tell as part of 8th grade as well. And then you already saw those settlements. There's where Jamestown came in, where are all those first settlements, and where are those names. At any point in time, if you put too much information on this map, it starts to get unwieldy and you're like, oh my gosh, Dave, my ADHD is kicking in and I cannot. The clear map button will take it all away and you can start fresh. So these are not breakable. The kids cannot break these. It is all a web app that is running in part of a web page. And if anything does go awry, they can just hit the clear map button and it'll go again. So we reference multiple clickable maps throughout the course of all the grade levels, and 8th grade is no exception. And these are things that you can just send to your kids through your learning management system. You can put it on a QR code they can scan, they can get going. They're all free. They will always remain free. That's part of Dr. Gershmel's work and legacy. And we provide activities to go along with all of these throughout class as well. So before I move on to the final one that I wanted to showcase tonight, and then we'll move into assessment and questions. What questions might you have for me over the geohistogram? Hearing none, I will move on to the last one of these that I'm going to share before we move into assessment and the Q&A. So Harper's Ferry is very similar in some cases to actually, no, I'm not going to do Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry is very close to Harper's Ferry is very close to the where do we put our activity from a little bit longer. I want to do why did the South lose? So from a geographic perspective, why the South lost. This presentation is a little bit shorter than some of the other Gershmel ones you'll come across. Weighs in at about 20 slides, but if you look at the Civil War and you look at why the North won and why the South lost through a geographic lens, you see some interesting stuff. So one goal of the entire eighth grade class is to put together a chain of cause and effect that leads to the Civil War and beyond. Early in the units, we do this activity, which is a regioning activity. It's one of the clickable maps that are available that I referenced during the geohistogram piece. And this appears in multiple grade levels as well because it's a solid activity and we can always use the review. And this activity has you actually draw 4 lines to divide North America into a bunch of different regions. And these regions are easy for students to remember. And when you look at the Southeast, that's a region that has enough rain to grow trees and has 200 days above freezing, which is where a lot of farming is taking place. That farming, however, is cotton because of the need for the growing season. Later on in the units, we ask this question, how did geographic conditions make huge differences in population growth? And you can see from this graph, we also get into economic wealth and political clout and military might. We have referenced this graph in previous lessons. So this is a little bit of a review for students. Then we bring in soils. So we have some soil presentations that come across here too. So this is really going to bring home for kids towards the end of the class what all of these things have in common and why we spent time doing them. So soils made by the environment, Ulta soils are made when there's more than enough rain for trees and at least 7 months with no frost. In other words, that entire southeast region where those lines kids learn to draw go. We also take a look at corn and where corn is grown. Farmers tend to get much lower yields, even though they pay more for fertilizer and work hard to control weeds and insects. That's one of the reasons South lost the war. It had trouble feeding itself. What crop were they majorly producing down there? It was cotton. Cotton needs 200 days without frost, so it had to be grown in that region. And that region had the best soil type for it. So using maps, we can start to determine that, the South was probably going to be starved into submission at some point. We also then revisit this idea of slavery again. The labor requirement for cotton and tobacco made it harder to be an abolitionist in the South. It's not to say there were not abolitionists in the South, and that's not to say everyone in the North was an abolitionist, but made it harder for you to argue that we shouldn't have slaves down South because the labor was intensive, very intensive. So we have a student activity that leads to the plantation economy and why that was such a dominant factor down South. And so we review that in this presentation as well, again, to bring it home. And when you look at these regions, it's interesting that it's those same regions that we looked at before that are also the ones that vote to secede. So cotton was king, with 2 exceptions to the general rule about poor soil. The fertile soils of the Black Belt and the Mississippi River floodplain. Those are your two exceptions to this rule. And this led to a forced migration of nearly 1 million people, 1 million enslaved people in the decades leading up to the war. So another reason the South lost the war, again, going back to conditions and connections, the conditions that make that soil infertile also supported diseases. So had a higher death rate and lower productivity because of that. Disease adds another reason why the South lost. The North had been growing faster for decades. They had a lower death rate, higher immigration, had 3 times as many railroad miles and more than 10 times as many factory workers. And then the final major reason the South lost the war, slave owners feared for a slave revolt, so they had to keep strong security forces close to home. So here's a huge list of some of the many reasons why the South lost the war. But it's done through this lens of here's a whole slew of activities you've done through the course of all of 8th grade. And it kind of brings to close that Civil War unit and brings into focus that final unit on Reconstruction. So this is a really neat tie it all together activity because every one of those screenshots you saw on that presentation are activities that kids have done throughout the course of eighth grade Giants. So again, it's a lot of resurfacing, it's a lot of bringing back prior knowledge and prior activities, and it's doing it through the lens of now let's take a look at why we were really, 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 studying this stuff all along. So, any questions on that final activity before I move into assessments and Q&A? All right. So all of these were done intentionally. They're a good representation of the different types of activities you'll find across all of the units here. And all of them are, again, clickable. They usually have a student component as well that allows them to either do something with it as homework or as an assessment or alongside while you're presenting online. But all of these were very research based and come from Phil Gershmel's body of work. And sometimes the Phil activities are the ones that need a little more explanation, which is why I picked these three to kind of share with you tonight, so that you guys could sort of see what makes them tick and understand they're not as scary as they look, even though some of them are, 80 PowerPoint slides long. So a lot of discussion built in, which is nice. Let's talk assessments and then let's get into Q&A and then let's get you people out of here. Assessment wise, we created assessments when we did the last update to Giants 8th grade, which looks like it was the 23-24 school year. So a couple of school years ago. We had teachers who said, hey, we will pilot these assessments for you and we will give you a ton of feedback. We gave them to anyone who asked and received no feedback. So I'm assuming all of the assessments are good and perfect. Either way, even if they are not, they do represent a really good starting point for you. The problem is you are not going to find the assessments anywhere on the Giants website. And the reason for that is we do not want students to be able to come across them and find them easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the assessment folder with you in the chat right now. And I recommend that you copy this link and maybe bookmark this link. If you lose this link, don't worry about it. Just email me and I will send it to you again. But this link that I am dropping in the chat right now, maybe, copy link copied. There we go. I'm going to drop it in the chat right now. This link will get you to all of the assessments. You will notice all of these assessments are in Google format and they're actually in Google slide format. What we did, we created the background of these slides so kids can't edit them. So I'm looking at the question here, I'm looking at the prompt, and I'm clicking all over it, and I have editing rights and I can't do anything with it. Your kids aren't going to have editing rights to the original. You're going to share it with them either through Google Classroom or you can create your own link. You can make your own copy and create your own links to send out to the kids. But if you want to give it to them online, we give you everything you need to do it here. Where they can click is in here, right? The reasons cited above for the adoption of the Articles of Confederation from the passage above here in this text box. Over here, we also have some drag and drop style questions where they might drag here and drop it and let go. And then your job as the teacher is you're pulling it in to take a look at them. You'll just go through probably about a slide per student, and then you'll go through the next one and you'll give them the points for each one. We have essay style questions in here as well. So when you look at these, you're not going to find 40, 50 question tests for each unit. Usually they're right around 20 or below. And the reason for that is these are deeper style questions. They're not quite as cut and dry as a ABCD multiple choice. We do have some of those, but for the most part, we're trying to dig deeper. We're trying to surface more rigor. So these are available to you. And we really would like some feedback. So if you do them with your students and you're like, gosh, Dave, completely missed the mark, let us know, give us some suggestions, because we do want these to be useful. The assessments are always the last thing that we develop. I know I'm a student of Grant and Wiggins and understanding by design and backwards design process, and start with the end in mind, and the end is the assessment. But we actually develop the units without the assessments, and just like the textbook, the textbook without the curriculum pack, we got people asking, where are the assessments, where are the assessments? So now, between open book giants and these assessments, we're offering you a basis of all of it. So there you go. So that link is in the chat. Like I said, if you go to that folder now, feel free to bookmark it. It will always be this folder. We have an assessment for every single one of the units. And again, we hope that you find them useful, and we hope that you'll provide feedback on them. So that is it on assessments. What questions might you have for me on that? And there you go. There were my three deep breaths. There we go. So I have thrown a lot at you tonight. We have gone through, I've given you a bird's eye overview of the entire story of eighth grade. I've showcased and shared with you some of the cool activities that go along with this, some of the added bells and whistles that we've added over the years, like the compelling question posters, the student journals that start around Unit 3. We've talked about pacing and what you should aim for, keeping in mind it takes 3 to 5 years for anyone to get good at any curriculum. So that may or may not happen. And now I'm going to turn it over, because we wanted to offer at least a half an hour each night for questions from you guys if you are out there implementing and have run into some issues. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint, but I'll keep sharing my screen in case I have to bring anything up. And wondering, Q&A time, guys. What questions do you have for me? All right, well, gang, if there aren't any other questions, I'll hang out for a few minutes here, but you are released. You're free to go. It is 6:30. Got something in my eye right now. It's 6:30, so 2 sketch credits coming your way in March. Appreciate your time and attention tonight, and we will see you when we see you. Have a great night.